Thanks for joining me for episode 2 of the 1943 Gibson L-00. In episode 1, last week's episode, I removed the bridge so that we could start working on this big old top crack. You can see there's some old carpenter's glue down in that crack that isn't doing much but cupping the soundboard. I warmed up the soundboard with a 250 watt heat lamp from about a foot away. I did it slowly and safely. I also warmed up the X-Acto blade right under the lamp and was able to remove a lot of that glue. We also learned in episode 1 that this particular year, some of the necks did not have truss rods, and we found out why. The first brace that I glued was this transverse brace that goes in between the sound hole and the fretboard. When I did that, when I was allowing the glue to cure, I pulled down on the headstock to align the sound hole and hopefully correct the neck angle just a skosh. Sometimes this can lower the action. On the treble side of the soundboard crack at the fretboard, there was enough space where I could insert a single shaving of spruce from the planer, and I applied it and glued it in place with the West Systems 655 thickened epoxy colored with some dark stain. I cleaned up the excess epoxy with naphtha on a Q-tip. Next, I took a look at this big, deep gouge. It was like a giant scratch, but it was just really a gouge. It was like a little canyon on the soundboard. I took a little lacquer retarder on a brush and filled in the areas that had some raw wood. Sometimes this helps to disguise some of the imperfections. And it softens the old lacquer just a skosh around each one of these damaged areas. Now that the epoxy is cured, I'll go in with some Glue Boost Fill and Finish Ultra Thin applied with a looper in my X-Acto knife. I got some low lighting going here so I can kind of show you what's going on. I put a sponge inside the guitar to kind of hydrate the crack, try to get it to close up on its own before I do any further treatments. But you'll see what happened was I had it all flat and it punched back up. You know, it's cupped again on either side of the crack. So this is what I plan to do. So initially what I was going to do was I pressed it and I was going to put a spline in it, but after seeing the Luth Group interview with TJ Thompson this week, I decided to take some of his crack cleats. I made these little thermoplastic cawls to hold it, and see, they're flexible. The deal is, like, StewMac sells this kit that TJ sells, but it's completely flat. It doesn't conform to the radius of the Gibson top. So I made these that are very flexible, and I plan on holding the cleats with these, and then getting some magnets from K&J Magnets. I gotta place an order with them, but I plan on letting the Gibson hydrate for a few weeks while I wait in. I'll get the magnets this week, and then I'll make a little cawl that goes on top with some more magnets. These magnets stick together. Anyways, it's a work in progress. So it's been 2 weeks in the making of getting ready to do this glue up. I have the TJ Thompson crack cleats inside. They look like this. There's one length of it in between the bridge plate and tone bar. There's one smaller piece in between the two tone bars, and then there's a piece, the longest piece, down here in between the tail block and the tone bar. So the square magnets are inside and on the outside, and then these sound hole clamps are flattening the crack, and hopefully tomorrow when I take these clamps off, it'll be flat as a pancake. Just with these teeny tiny little thingies. So this is the little Tupperware dish that I've had inside of the guitar for the last 2 weeks. This is moistened, and I had a garbage bag over the guitar body. And right now, hot hide glue with these little guys. I was able to get one more clamp on here, this shorty, which is great because it clamps down in that area. And yeah, so they have 1, 2, 3, 4 different sized sound hole clamps over there at StewMac. Very helpful. Now, let's see how she turned out. It's flat as a pancake. Amazingly flat. You remember it was cupped up on either side, but my calls are still stuck in there. Oh no. Oh no. That is G-Flex epoxy with dirty amber stain. We're gonna stick it right in that crack. What's left of the crack. So here it is. These are the little calls that I made. What it is a thermoplastic with a 5/8 dowel pushed into it. After it hardens and cures, I shape it to the appropriate shape of the cleats. So on the outside of the guitar, you have this thin Lexan material that I made on the bandsaw, and I've mapped out where the braces are. Now that the epoxy has cured, I'll take a razor blade and I'll scrape it flush before I do the wet sanding. There were a few spots that still needed a little bit of filler, and that's what that dirty amber stain was for. Now the gouge that's over here towards the base side of the lower bout, I filled with Glue Boost Fill and Finish and a Glue Dry Accelerator. That needs scraped and sanded. When you're scraping, you want to come in at a bit of an angle like a snowplow coming down the street. Just a few degrees, 20-degree angle. Yep. Now I'm going to take some mineral spirits and wet sand paper and try to get this top flat, at least where I put the fillers in. Just gonna smooth things over, and then we'll take her out to the garage and give it maybe a day's worth of lacquer, nitro. I decided this one needs to be cleated also, so I got this prepared. It's gonna go right there, and maybe I can film a little bit of this. Since I've already done my practice on this one shouldn't be as stressful. This one I'm not going to put the paper towels inside and get it super wet. I'm just going to let the glue do the wetting. I'm going to get it a little hotter than the first time with this hair dryer. Okay. That looks great. Maybe scooch it slightly this way. And get my big sound hole clamped. This is the 11-incher. Oops. I'm gonna put it right here. That looks good. And I have this extra magnet. I have this clamp. And I have this clamp. Then I can really crank this down and it should smash that cupped crack right closed. That's it. I'll probably do the same thing for this one because when I was polishing this crack, some of it got in here and I realized that it's just, you can actually feel it. So this one's all smooth, but you can still see it. I could fill that in a little bit, maybe, I don't know. Okay, overnight I got back braces 3 and 4 glued up. The very last 4th back brace, the one way back here, I actually only got the base side clamped up and glued. Today I'll do the treble side. It's lifted on both ends, even worse on the treble side. But this, I used the fancy expensive jack with a piece of wood taped down onto the corner. I'll do the same thing today over here. But let's look at these top cracks. So yesterday this one got glued and cleated from the inside. This one of course is done. This one's still a little unlevel. And this will be the very last crack to look at. I'm going to do some tests today to see how open it is, but it seems to be just as bad as this one was. And the reason this system works so good is that we're gluing the crack on the edges at the same time as we're gluing the cleat on in the inside. It's really hard to get glue down into this crack, and what that cleat does is when you put glue on it and you stick it up in there and you smash it down, you force glue up from both sides pretty much. You're smashing the glue down into the crack from both sides. And you're aligning it nice and good, so it's not uneven. This one's still a little uneven. I don't know if you can tell. Alright, I've got all the cracks leveled off pretty good. I got a little bit of shellac color on there. I got this all cleaned off. This kind of masked off. I'm waiting to mask off the sides still, but I'm waiting for the right conditions out there so I can spray just a few mist coats of some satin or flat lacquer on over top of everything just to homogenize the look of it. And we'll get spraying as soon as the weather allows. It's right around between noon and 4 p.m. every day that the humidity dips down below 50. And if it's warm enough out, I'll pick a day and spray about 3 or 4 coats. And while I'm waiting for the weather to cooperate, I'll pull some of these 80-year-old frets out very carefully. They don't seem to be giving me much grief. There's no chip out. Don't need any heat. I'm going to save these for the owner. They probably have sentimental value. And this shouldn't take too long. Well, the conditions got good, so I'm out in the garage spraying. I did a few mist coats of the flat, and I realized I needed a little bit more of a build, so I started using some of this nitro lacquer. It's the Mohawk stringed instrument stuff, and I've had it sitting out there for a year, so it's probably only spraying at about 5 psi. That's why it looks like I'm laying it on there forever, but I did lay it on pretty thick, and I wouldn't recommend doing that because as it shrinks back, it creates these new kind of wrinkly, crackly things that I wouldn't recommend. I am sanding it off pretty much. Well, I set that aside for a week, and then I'm going to wet sand and spray a flash coat. But that's a week from now, so I'll work on plugging those 2 extra holes on the wings of the bridge. Now the bridge, it was probably Brazilian rosewood, and these little plugs that I have are Indian rosewood, so we're not expecting a miracle or anything. I mean, it'll look okay. Actually, you know what I could do is spray the entire bridge with that dark walnut Mohawk lacquer. I did that on the other one. It looked really good. But on this one, what I did is I sanded it with 120 grit sandpaper, leveled off the plug, and then I continued on sanding the entire bridge with 120, and then I switched to 220. And then after 220, I won't be putting any oil or sanding it with anything higher than 220. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean off all the dust with a little bit of naphtha and acetone. And I'm going to take it back down to the garage and put my dirty guitar buffing wheel on the buffer. And you're not going to believe what this thing looks like after it's done. Run it on the buffer with the dirty guitar wheel. And the other thing I did is I ran the back side of the guitar. I ran that on the dirty guitar buffer, cleaned off all that glue, and then put my regular wheel back on and buffed it all up nice. So it leaves a little bit of buffing compound residue that cleans off nicely with naphtha. And now it's been a week, so I can wet sand that thick coat of nitro that I laid down. Or did I lay down? I think I put down 2 or 3 coats of that nitro. I put down some mist coats of the flat one day, and then a couple heavier coats of that gloss the day after. But I wet sand with mineral spirits, and I wipe it clean with naphtha. And then I wait for a nice low humidity day, and where the humidity is below 50, and I run it back down to that spray window. This time I've got the air compressor going, and I mixed up my own flash coat, which is a real thin mixture. It only has 10% lacquer. The other 90% is lacquer retarder and lacquer thinner in equal parts. So like 45% of each. Super thin. I'm spraying it with 35 psi. And I'm putting on a nice wet coat over the entire soundboard. I'll let that set for a week. That's just one coat, one flash coat. That was on a StewMac video about 5 years ago. Dan Earlywine was doing a flash coat on an old Gibson, and it turned out super. That's what it looks like right after spraying it. It kind of looked weird up there on the upper bout because I probably didn't clean it good enough. It was probably a little layer of dirt on the upper bout, but it did polish up nice. So before I polish it up, I've got a whole week. I'll work on the frets. I'm using that thin, narrow wire I'm radiusing it to about a 9.5 inch radius. I'm putting in the brown tight bond liquid hide glue into each slot. Just running it back and forth with my X-Acto blade. Of course, I cleaned all the slots out and beveled the edges. But I do like to use this brown hide glue for frets. It swells up the wood a little bit and it grabs onto the tangs. I hammer in the frets. That's a dead blow fretting hammer from StewMac. And that second hammer, I actually usually use the nylon side on the fret. I don't know why I had the brass side down on that one. But I check each fret after I seat it with a 3 thou feeler gauge to make sure there aren't any gaps, which there was on that one. I think I ended up pulling that fret out and sawing out a little more wood into the slot so that it could seat a little deeper. But the frets went in nice. I got them all dressed up and polished, and we're going to run the guitar one more time on the buffer. So this is the way the guitar came in. He said he tried to clean it for hours and he couldn't do anything but just keep smudging it around. What it is, they left glue all over it, everything. There was 2 big cracks in there. They got a ton of glue into the cracks. So those cracks are not going anywhere. They're completely unlevel. But I had to like wipe that all down with like a water-based solvent. I think I just used soapy water. And run it on my dirty guitar buffing wheel, the same wheel that I just used on the bridge. I used it to clean off the majority of that glue and get it to the state where I could change the wheel out to my regular double buff, and man, that thing came out shiny. Maybe too shiny. Now I'm cutting the fret ends at high speed. First I cut, then I bevel. I like using the fret beveling file. It's the snap file with a little Dynaglide on it. First I bevel, then I use the fret end dressing file. I also use the diamond snap file on there. This is the fret, the last fret before the original frets. The last new fret needed to come down, kind of transition into the old. The old ones are a little lower than the new ones. So I'll bring it down about 0.010 of an inch and crown it. There's the diamond file. I'm going to take those coarse file markings off the bevels. And of course that takes a little bit of the finish off of the edge of the fretboard, so I'll put a little new finish on there. Just a little wipe of shellac is all. It doesn't take much, and it's pretty easy. Put a little bit on the treble side of the fretboard. Now I'll take the saddle slot file. Usually use that to clean slots, saddle slots. I heard in a Luth Group interview with Mark Stutman from Folkway Music that he likes to map out the X-brace and drill a couple holes in the soundboard, and then squeezing a little bit of hot hide glue down in between during the bridge glue-on process. Hopefully it worked good. I'm sorry I didn't film the bridge gluing process, but this video is getting a little bit long. So here's how the back turned out. Nice and shiny. I didn't open up those cracks and re-glue them though. There was plenty of glue in them. And the top turned out nice. Alright, so I just got the new machines on here. Aren't they nice? They're just like the originals. And I didn't use the bushings that came with the Golden Age Restoration tuners. I would have had to drill the peg head holes out too much. So I bought these. They're just also from StewMac, but they're more like they're not this type. They're just smooth. They're like pressed. And I used this tool, which is it's 1/4 inch here, but then it flares out to the perfect diameter for these. They have a whole variety of 5 different sizes on the StewMac website, but it allows you to drill a perfect little countersink hole for these bushings. Then I kind of wax the hole and I press them in with a quick grip clamp, and they're all set to go. Now I just have to make a nut and a saddle, and we're going to be checking it out. I use the X-Acto saw to start each slot, and then I open them up a little wider as we go, as needed, starting with the 10 thou and working all the way up to I think it was like a 50 thou for the bass strings. Roughed in the nut, roughed in the saddle. Now this is a through saddle, it's not a drop-in saddle. I know someone was complaining that I glued the last one in, and I was going to make his job a lot harder when this guitar comes to him and he has to lower the action by taking the saddle out and taking material off the bottom. Yeah, right. On a through saddle, if you need to lower it, you need to take the material off the top, because the bottom, you can't be removing material from the bottom of one of these. It'll make it too short. Well, I'm going to dial this one in by using the Dremel tool. A little trick I saw on Mike McConville's channel. Now, Mike doesn't use any kind of vices. He's against putting a guitar in a vise, but he might be into something like this for, putting the saddle, putting a vice in a vice, right? You gotta vice your vices. This will be close enough for starters. Close enough for starters. Get some strings on her. See if we need to make a few adjustments. We might be almost done with her. All right, so here's the new saddle. The old tall saddle, I preserved it because, just in case we do a neck reset to get this action down in the future, we want to go back to the original saddle, and then it'll be like all original, because I did use the original pearl dots. I reinstalled them. I reinstalled the little screws. These are brand new. And other than that, we got some new frets and some new tuners. Let's look at the tuners. So these, which I think I already showed you, but anyways, they look good. And oh yeah, new nut. That's actually an unbleached nut and a bleached. I went with the bleached saddle. So let's give her a listen. She's louder. Just to give you an idea what it sounds like now, there's a G chord, and then we'll compare it to what it sounds like when we're finished. So now that we're finished, I'm going fishing all of the time, and my baby going fishing too. Bet your life that your sweet wife are gonna catch more fish than you. Well, many fish bites if you got good baits. Here's a little story I would like to relate. If the fish are jumping, then I'm going fishing. My baby going fishing too. Appreciate you tuning in again, and for subscribing and all that other good stuff. Catch you later.